The stars had forgotten humanity. For 3,000 years, the galaxy moved on without them. Children of a dozen alien species grew up hearing stories about the humans, terrible stories about creatures who fought like demons and refused to die. But those were just myths now. Bedtime tales to scare little ones into behaving. Nobody believed humans were real anymore. Captain Daniel Cole stood on the bridge of the USS Horizon and stared at the endless darkness of space. His ship was one of the first to leave the Shroud Nebula in 3. Behind that wall of cosmic dust and radiation, humanity had hidden. They had rebuilt. They had grown stronger than anyone could imagine. "Sir, we're picking up something strange," said from her station. She was young, barely 23, but her fingers moved across the controls with confidence. "It looks like a distress signal." Lieutenant Commander Drake walked over to look at the readings. She was tall, sharp-eyed, and had a reputation for seeing trouble before it arrived. "It's coming from a civilian transport. Design." The Daniel knew that name from history books. They were one of the 12 species that had tried to wipe out humanity so long ago. His grandfather's grandfather had died fighting them. "There's more," continued. "I'm reading 6 smaller ships in pursuit. They're firing on the transport." Dr. Price looked up from his research terminal. He was the ship's chief science officer and the only person on board who had spent his entire life studying the old war. "Raiders," he said quietly. "Pirates hunting easy prey." Daniel's jaw tightened. The mission was simple: observe and report. Do not engage. Do not reveal that humanity still existed. Those were his orders. But he could see the data on the screen. The transport was carrying over 200 passengers, families, children, and the raiders were tearing it apart piece by piece. "How long until they breach the hull?" he asked. 4 minutes, answered, "maybe less." 4 minutes, 200 lives, aliens who belonged to a species that had tried to destroy his people. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. "Sir," his voice was soft, "what do we do?" Daniel thought about the orders. He thought about secrecy and strategy and all the careful plans that had brought them here. Then he thought about those children on that transport, scared and crying while their parents held them close. "Take us in," he said, "full combat speed." Smiled grimly, finally. The USS Horizon moved like nothing the galaxy had seen in 3,000 years. Human engineers had spent perfecting their ships. While the rest of the galaxy stagnated, humanity innovated. They created weapons that could crack moons and shields that could stop stars. The raiders never had a chance. The first one exploded before it even knew the horizon was there. The second tried to run, but was caught by a beam of blue light that cut it in half. The third and fourth died together, colliding as they tried to escape. The fifth surrendered, dropping its weapons and broadcasting pleas for mercy. Daniel let it go. He was not here to kill, he was here to save. The sixth raider managed to jump to hyperspace. It escaped, and Daniel knew that meant trouble, but he did not regret his choice. "Transport is stable," reported. "They're requesting communication." "Open a channel," Daniel said. The screen flickered and a face appeared. It was gray skin, large dark eyes, a mouth full of small sharp teeth. The alien was shaking. Whether from fear or relief, Daniel could not tell. "Unknown vessel," they said. "We thank you for your assistance. Please identify yourselves. What species are you?" Daniel stood tall. He had practiced this moment in his mind 1,000 times. But now that it was here, the words felt heavier than he expected. "My name is Captain Daniel Cole," he said slowly. "I am human." The face went pale. Its eyes widened until they seemed ready to fall out of its head. Behind it, Daniel could hear screaming. Other passengers had heard him. They were panicking. "That is not possible," they whispered. "Humans are extinct. Humans are myths." "We are very real," Daniel replied. "And we are here to help you. Stand by for rescue operations." He cut the channel and turned to his crew. They were all looking at him with a mixture of pride and worry. "Well," said dryly, "so much for staying hidden." Laughed nervously. "The galaxy is going to lose its collective mind." Daniel nodded. He knew what this meant. 3,000 years of secrecy gone in an instant. Earth Command would not be happy. But when he thought about those families on the transport, still alive because of his choice, he could not bring himself to regret it. "Begin rescue operations," he ordered. "Bring the wounded to our medical bay, treat them like our own." Hesitated. "Sir, they're scared of us, really scared. Some of them are calling us demons." "Then show them we're not," Daniel said simply. "Show them what humans really are." Over the next few hours, the crew of the Horizon worked tirelessly. They treated injuries, provided food and water, and comforted children who cried for their parents. Some of them refused human help at first. They had grown up on stories of human monsters. But slowly, one by one, they began to see the truth. These were not demons. These were people. Strange people from an impossible past, but people nonetheless. One elder approached Daniel as the rescue operations concluded. The old alien's hands trembled as it bowed its head. "Captain Cole," it said quietly, "in our oldest texts, humans are called the destroyers who sleep. We were taught that if they ever woke, they would bring fire and death to all living things." Daniel met the elder's eyes. "And what do you think now?" The elder was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, it reached out and touched Daniel's hand, a gesture of trust among the. "I think," the elder said, "that we were wrong about many things." The Horizon escorted the transport to safety, but the escaped raider had already spread the news. Across the galaxy, on 1,000 worlds, beings of every species stared at their screens in disbelief. The humans had returned. And everything was about to change. The news spread faster than light itself. On every planet in the galaxy, screens showed the same impossible images. Human ships, human faces, humans speaking in their strange, soft language. The species that was supposed to be dead for 3,000 years had returned from the grave. On the throne world of the hegemony, High Sovereign Al watched the footage with cold fury. He was ancient by his people's standards, old enough to remember the teachings of his grandfather. Humans were supposed to be extinct. His ancestors had made sure of that. "This is a trick," he said to his advisors. "Some lesser species playing games." His chief advisor, a nervous creature named Sorrel, shook his head. "The genetic scans are confirmed, High Sovereign. These are true humans. The blood matches perfectly with ancient samples." Al slammed his fist against his throne. "Then where have they been hiding for 3,000 years? How did they survive?" Nobody had an answer. Across the galaxy, deep within the Shroud Nebula, Admiral Lisa Monroe received Captain Cole's report. She was a woman of 57 years, her hair gray and her eyes hard. Her great-great-grandmother had been one of the last survivors of the original war. The hatred of what the Dominion had done to humanity ran deep in her blood. But she was also practical. "You did the right thing, Captain," she said through the communication screen. "Those civilians would have died without you." Daniel Cole looked relieved. "I expected you to be angry about breaking protocol." "Protocol exists to serve our people," Lisa replied. "Not the other way around. Besides, we always knew this day would come. We just have to move faster now." She ended the call and turned to her staff. "Wake up, Ambassador. It's time for humanity to rejoin the galaxy." Had spent his entire life preparing for this moment. He was a diplomat, trained from childhood in the art of negotiation. He knew every species in the galaxy, every custom, every taboo. And he understood something that many of his fellow humans did not. Revenge would not bring back the dead. "We need to show them we have changed," he said during the strategy meeting. 3,000 years ago, we were scattered and weak. They hunted us because they feared what we might become. Now we are strong. We need to prove that our strength will not be used for conquest. Admiral Monroe frowned. Some of them will never trust us. Some will try to finish what their ancestors started. I know, admitted, but we have to try. War should be the last option, not the first. 2 weeks later, arrived at the neutral station of War. It was a massive space station in unclaimed territory, a place where different species had met for centuries to negotiate trade and treaties. Now it would host the first human ambassador in 3,000 years. The station was packed. Representatives from every major species had come to see if the rumors were true. Cameras followed as he walked through the corridors, his security team close behind. Among them was Drake, dressed as a civilian aide but carrying enough hidden weapons to start a small war. Could feel the fear in the air. Aliens stepped back as he passed. Some made religious gestures, others stared with open hostility. He reached the main conference hall and took his seat at the table. Across from him sat representatives of the hegemony, the Velar Collective, and 4 other major powers. None of them looked happy to see him. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," began. "I know this is unexpected." "Unexpected," spat the representative. "Your species was supposed to be dead. You were a plague that the galaxy cured long ago." Kept his face calm. "We were never a plague. We were refugees who asked for help. Your ancestors responded with genocide." The room erupted in angry voices. Old records were cited, ancient justifications repeated. Let them talk. He had expected this. When the noise finally died down, he spoke again. "I did not come here to argue about the past. I came to talk about the future. Humanity does not seek revenge. We only want one thing, to never be victims again." Before anyone could respond, the doors burst open. 12 armed figures rushed in, weapons raised. They were hired killers, sent by unknown masters who wanted humanity's first ambassador dead before he could speak. They never reached him. Drake moved like water through the assassins. The first 2 fell before they could fire a shot. The third managed to pull his trigger but was already behind him, using his body as a shield. She broke his arm, took his weapon, and shot the 4th and 5th in the same motion. The remaining 7 tried to regroup. It did not help. Was everywhere at once, a blur of precise violence. In 12 seconds, all 12 assassins were on the ground, unconscious or groaning in pain. She straightened her clothes and returned to her position behind as if nothing had happened. The conference hall was silent. Every alien in the room stared at her with pure terror. Stood and brushed dust from his sleeve. "As I was saying, humanity does not seek revenge, but make no mistake, we will defend ourselves. We have spent 3,000 years preparing for this moment. You tried to destroy us once. You will not succeed again." He paused, letting his words sink in. "However, we would prefer peace. We would prefer friendship. We would prefer to build something new with you rather than fight over something old. The choice is yours." He placed a data chip on the table. It contained humanity's proposed treaty, fair terms, mutual respect, open trade. "Take your time," said. "We are not going anywhere." He turned and walked out of the hall, at his side. Behind him, the representatives of a dozen species sat in stunned silence. For 3,000 years, they had told themselves that humans were monsters, primitive, brutal, dangerous. They had justified their ancestors' actions as necessary protection. Now those monsters had come back. They were more powerful than ever, and they were offering peace. The galaxy had no idea how to respond. But on a distant planet, High Sovereign Al watched the footage of the failed assassination and the treaty offer. His face twisted with rage. "They mock us," he hissed. "They think we are weak. They think we will bow to them." He turned to his generals. "Begin preparations. If humanity wants to return to the galaxy, we will give them the welcome they deserve." The drums of war had begun to beat once more. 6 months had passed since humanity's return became known to the galaxy. In that time, everything had changed, and nothing had changed. Some species welcomed the humans, though a small race that had suffered under Dominion rule for centuries saw humanity as saviors. The Thresh, ancient traders who cared only for profit, saw new markets and new opportunities. Even a few scholars quietly reached out, curious about the truth behind the myths. But the old powers were not so welcoming. The remnants of the Dominion of Velar saw humanity as a threat. They remembered the old war. They remembered how hard it had been to defeat the humans the first time. And they feared what would happen now that those humans had returned with ships that could destroy fleets in seconds. High Sovereign Al spent every waking moment preparing for the conflict he knew was coming. He gathered allies. He built weapons. He told his people that the human monsters had returned to finish what they had started long ago. And then he struck first. The colony world of New Eden was one of humanity's smallest settlements. It sat on the edge of the Shroud Nebula, a farming community of 50,000 people. They had no military base. They had only basic defense systems. They were simply ordinary families trying to build ordinary lives. The attack came at dawn. Al had sent a fringe faction, extremists who believed that humans were literally demons from their religious texts. They arrived with 100 ships and enough firepower to crack the planet in half. The colonists never had a chance. By the time human rescue ships arrived, 40,000 people were dead. Men, women, children, entire families wiped out in hours. The survivors huddled in underground shelters, their faces empty with shock. Admiral Lisa Monroe stood in the command center of the USS Resolute and watched the footage from New Eden. Her hands shook with rage. 40,000 of her people, gone, murdered by cowards who attacked civilians because they were afraid to face the human military. "They want a war," she said quietly. "They have one." Commander Brooks stood at attention before her. He was the leader of the Revenants, humanity's elite special forces unit. His team was made up of the best soldiers humanity had ever produced, trained for missions that no ordinary soldier could survive. "Give us the order," said. "We're ready." Lisa looked at him. "The faction that did this calls themselves the Purifiers. Their leadership is hiding on a fortress moon in the system. I want them captured. Not killed, captured. They will face justice for what they have done." Nodded, understood. "And Commander," Lisa added, "make sure the rest of the galaxy sees what happens to those who murder our people." The Revenants deployed that night. Specialist Cross checked her weapons for the third time as their stealth ship approached the fortress moon. She was the team's demolitions expert, a woman who found peace in controlled explosions. Next to her, 5 other Revenants prepared in silence. "All right, listen up," said. "The Purifiers have about 2,000 soldiers on this moon. They have anti-ship cannons, ground forces, and a command bunker buried 300 meters underground. They think they're safe." Smiled, "They think wrong." The ship landed in a dead zone between sensor arrays. The Revenants moved like shadows through the darkness, their advanced armor making them nearly invisible. The first guard posts fell without a single alarm being raised. His voice came through the communication system. "Cross, you're up." Planted her charges on the main power generator. When they detonated, the entire fortress went dark. Emergency lights flickered on, but by then the Revenants were already inside. The Purifiers fought back. They were fanatics, convinced they were fighting against evil itself. But fanaticism was no match for 3,000 years of human innovation. The Revenants' weapons fired faster, hit harder, and never missed. Their armor absorbed shots that would have killed any other soldier. It took 11 hours to secure the fortress. When it was over, the Purifier leadership knelt in chains before Brooks. They were bleeding, broken, and terrified. Behind them, their entire military force lay in ruins. Every cannon destroyed, every ship disabled, every soldier who had participated in the New Eden massacre either dead or captured. "You cannot do this," one of the Purifier leaders spat. We are doing holy work. We are cleansing the galaxy of your corruption. Crouch down to look him in the eye. 40,000 people, families, children, you killed them while they slept. They were humans, the leader said, as if that explained everything. Stood up, record this, he said to his team. The footage was broadcast across the galaxy within hours. It showed the captured Purifier leaders being loaded onto human ships. It showed the destroyed fortress, the disabled fleet, the complete and total defeat of an enemy that had thought itself untouchable. And it showed Commander Brooks delivering a simple message. The people who attacked our colony believed that humans were monsters from ancient myths. They believed we were demons who could be destroyed with enough faith and firepower. He paused, letting the words settle. They were wrong about us being demons, but they were right about one thing: we are exactly as dangerous as the old stories claimed. We do not seek war, but when war is brought to our homes, to our families, to our children, we will answer, and our answer will be absolute. The galaxy watched in silence. Some species felt vindicated. The myths were true. Humans were monsters, just as they had always said. But others saw something different. They saw a species that had been attacked without provocation and had responded with precision instead of rage. They saw captured enemies, not mass graves. They saw justice, not vengeance. Scholar, an academic who had spent her life studying human mythology, made her decision that night. She packed her belongings, booked passage on a neutral transport, and set course for human space. She needed to understand these people. She needed to know if the myths were true, or if her entire civilization had been lying to itself for 3,000 years. Meanwhile, in his throne room, High Sovereign Al stared at the footage of his defeated allies. The Purifiers had been fanatics, but they had been useful fanatics. Now they were gone, their power broken in a single night. "It seems," he said slowly, "that we underestimated them." His advisors said nothing. They were too afraid. Al stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. "No matter. The Purifiers were always expendable, but now we know what we are dealing with. Now we can prepare properly." He turned to his generals. "Summon the Old Dominion, all of them. It is time to finish what our ancestors started." The Cold War was turning hot, and humanity stood ready. 1 year had passed since humanity returned to the galaxy. In that time, the universe had split into 2 camps. The Free Worlds Alliance stood with humanity. They were the smaller species, the ones who had suffered under Dominion rule for centuries. They saw humans as proof that even the mightiest empires could be challenged. Ambassador had worked tirelessly to build this coalition, traveling from world to world, proving that humanity wanted partners, not subjects. On the other side stood the Reformed Dominion, the remnants of the old alliance that had tried to destroy humanity 3,000 years ago. High Sovereign Al had united them with promises and threats, convincing them that the only way to survive was to strike before humans grew too powerful. "They are building an armada," General Rand reported to the High Sovereign. He was Al's supreme military commander, a veteran of 100 campaigns. But unlike his master, he was a practical man. He did not believe in myths or demons. He believed in numbers, strategies, and cold, hard facts. And the facts troubled him. "Our spies report that human technology is at least 2 centuries ahead of our most advanced systems," Rand continued. "Their shields can absorb our strongest weapons. Their cannons can pierce our thickest armor. Ship for ship, we cannot match them." Al waved a dismissive hand. "Then we will overwhelm them with numbers. 100 of our ships for every one of theirs if necessary." "That strategy worked 3,000 years ago," Rand said carefully, "when they were scattered refugees with primitive weapons. They are not that anymore." "Are you afraid, General?" Al asked, his voice dangerous. Rand met his sovereign's eyes. "I am realistic, but I will follow your orders as I always have." The attack came 3 weeks later. Al launched his assault on 3 human-allied worlds simultaneously. 2,000 Dominion ships appeared in the skies of planets that had declared friendship with humanity. The message was clear: anyone who stood with the humans would burn. On the bridge of the USS Valiant, Captain Hart received the distress calls. He was 42 years old, a career officer who had never expected to see real combat. Now he was watching 3 worlds cry for help at once. "It's a trap," said Dr. Martin, his ships. She had been assigned to help bridge the cultural gap with their allies, but she also had a sharp strategic mind. "Al wants to draw our fleet into the open. He has something waiting for us." Nodded slowly. "You're probably right." He turned to his communications officer. "Get me Admiral Monroe." Lisa Monroe's face appeared on the screen moments later. Her expression was grim. "I know what you're going to say," she said before could speak. "It's a trap. We would be walking into exactly what Al wants." "Yes, ma'am." Lisa was silent for a long moment. "And if we don't go, 3 worlds die. Every species in the Free Worlds Alliance will see that friendship with humanity means nothing. They'll surrender to the Dominion within a month." "Yes, ma'am." Lisa closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were hard with resolve. "All ships prepare for deployment. We're going in." The Battle of the Crimson Rift became the largest military engagement in 3,000 years. The Dominion had gathered over 3,000 ships, hiding them in a massive nebula called the Crimson Rift. When the human fleet arrived to defend their allies, the trap was sprung. Dominion vessels poured out of the nebula like a swarm of angry insects, surrounding the human fleet on all sides. Al watched from his flagship, a smile on his ancient face. "At last," he whispered, "at last we finish what our ancestors started." But the smile faded quickly. Human ships did not die as easily as he had expected. Their shields held against weapons that should have torn them apart. Their guns fired bolts of energy that cut through Dominion armor like paper. And their pilots flew like they had been born in the void, dodging attacks that should have been impossible to avoid. Captain Hart stood on the bridge of the Valiant, shouting orders as his ship danced through the chaos. "Enemy cruiser on our port side." "I see it. Helm, bring us around. Tactical, target their engines." The Valiant spun on its axis, weapons blazing. The Dominion cruiser exploded in a ball of fire. But for every ship they destroyed, 2 more took its place. The Dominion had numbers on their side, and numbers mattered. Human ships began to fall, not many at first, but enough. "Admiral Monroe, we're taking heavy losses on the left flank," someone reported. Lisa Monroe stood at the center of her command ship, coordinates and casualty reports swirling around her. They were winning the ship-to-ship battles, but there were simply too many enemies. If something did not change, they would be overwhelmed. Then she saw it. Al's flagship, a massive vessel at the center of the Dominion formation. It was the command hub for the entire enemy fleet. "Captain Hart," she said through the communication channel, "do you see the flagship?" Hart looked at his tactical display. He saw it, and he saw what Admiral Monroe was thinking. "If we take out their command ship, their coordination falls apart," he said slowly. "Their fleet becomes a mob instead of an army." "It's too heavily defended," Lisa replied. "No ship could get close enough to." "I can." The channel went silent. Turned to his crew. They were looking at him with understanding in their eyes. They knew what he was about to ask. "This is a one-way trip," he said quietly. "I'm not ordering anyone to come with me." His helmsman laughed softly. "Captain, with respect, shut up and give us a course." The USS Valiant broke formation and accelerated toward the enemy flagship. Dominion ships tried to intercept, but the Valiant was too fast. It wove through the chaos like a needle through cloth, taking hits but never slowing down. Al saw it coming. His eyes widened. "Destroy that ship," he screamed. "All batteries, destroy it now." But it was too late. At the last moment, Hart activated the escape pods. His crew ejected into space, their pods shielded and cloaked. Then the Valiant slammed into Al's flagship at full speed. The explosion lit up the nebula like a second sun. When the light faded, both ships were gone. The Dominion flagship had been completely destroyed, and with it, the entire command structure of the enemy fleet. General Rand watched from his own vessel as chaos erupted among the Dominion forces. Ships that had been coordinated perfectly were now flying blind, crashing into each other, retreating in panic. "Signal a general retreat," he ordered, his voice hollow. "General the High Sovereign is dead," Rand said flatly. "The war is over. Get our people out of here before more of them die for nothing." The Dominion fleet fled. The human forces let them go. Rescue teams found Captain Hart floating in his escape pod 2 hours later. He was unconscious, badly injured but alive. He had ejected just before impact, riding the shockwave to safety. When he woke up in the medical bay, Admiral Lisa Monroe was sitting beside his bed. "You're either the bravest man I've ever met," she said, "or the craziest." Managed a weak smile. "Can it be both?" The Battle of the Crimson Rift was over. The Dominion had been broken, and across the galaxy, every species that had ever dismissed humans as myths was forced to accept a new truth. The humans were real, they were powerful, and they had just proven that they would sacrifice everything to protect those they called friends. The age of the Dominion was ending. Something new was about to begin. 3 years had passed since the humans returned to the galaxy. The war was over, not because one side had achieved total victory, but because both sides had finally grown tired of death. High Sovereign Al was gone, killed in the Battle of the Crimson Rift. His replacement came from an unexpected source, General Rand, the pragmatic soldier who had always questioned his master's obsession with ancient hatred. On the day of the peace ceremony, Rand stood before a crowd of millions. Behind him rose the ruins of the old neutral station of Or, the same station where the first human ambassador had nearly been assassinated 3 years ago. The same station where, 3,000 years before that, the original war had begun. "I am not here to apologize for what my ancestors did," Rand said, his voice carrying across the plaza. "Words cannot undo the suffering of 3,000 years, but I am here to say that we were wrong. We feared what we did not understand. We tried to destroy what we should have embraced, and in doing so, we nearly destroyed ourselves." He turned to face Admiral Lisa Monroe, who stood at the head of the human delegation. Behind her stood the heroes of the war, Captain Daniel Cole, now promoted to Admiral himself; Commander Drake, who had become the first human to lead an exploration mission beyond known space; Dr. Price, whose historical work had finally revealed the truth about the original conflict; Ambassador, the architect of the peace they were now celebrating; and Captain Hart, walking with a slight limp but standing tall. Rand extended his hand, a human gesture of trust that he had learned specifically for this moment. "I offer my hand in friendship," he said, "not because I am forced to, not because I am afraid, but because I believe it is right. I believe that our peoples can build something better together than we ever could apart." Lisa Monroe studied him for a long moment. She saw the sincerity in his eyes. She also saw the ghosts of 40,000 civilians who had died on New Eden. She saw 3,000 years of exile, of hiding, of preparing for a day that should never have had to come. Then she reached out and took his hand. "We accept," she said simply. "Let this be the beginning of something new." The crowd erupted in cheers, humans and aliens together, celebrating a peace that many had thought impossible. Later that evening, a private reception was held for the key figures of both sides. Admiral Daniel Cole found himself standing on a balcony overlooking the reconstructed station, a glass of wine in his hand that he had not touched. "You look troubled," said a familiar voice. He turned to find Drake leaning against the railing beside him. She had traded her uniform for civilian clothes, but she still moved like a soldier. "I keep thinking about what we've become," Daniel admitted. "When I took command of the Horizon, I thought our mission was to observe, to learn, maybe to make first contact peacefully. Instead, we fought a war." "We won a war," corrected. "Did we?" Daniel shook his head. "We spent 3,000 years preparing for revenge. We built weapons that could shatter planets. We trained soldiers to be killing machines. And now everyone looks at us with fear in their eyes, even our allies." He paused. "Is that what we wanted? To be the monsters they always said we were?" Was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded toward the reception hall behind them. "Look in there," she said. Daniel turned. Through the glass he could see a scene he had never expected to witness. Human and children were playing together, running, laughing, chasing each other around the tables. Their parents watched with a mixture of nervousness and hope. Scholar sat at a table surrounded by human students, explaining something that made them laugh. She had become the first alien professor at a human university, dedicating her life to building bridges between civilizations. Ambassador was deep in conversation with Rand. The two men who had once stood on opposite sides of an impossible divide now working together to draft the terms of the Galactic Compact. Captain Hart was teaching a young boy how to fold a paper airplane. "That's what we became," said softly. "Yes, we're dangerous. Yes, they fear us. But look at what we're doing with that power. We're not conquering. We're not taking revenge. We're building something. We're giving those kids a chance to grow up in a galaxy where they don't have to hate each other." Daniel watched the children play. A human girl caught the paper airplane and handed it back to the boy with a smile. He grinned back at her, all sharp teeth and joy. "You're right," Daniel admitted. "I just wish it hadn't taken so much death to get here." "It always does," replied. "That's the tragedy of history, but the question isn't whether the past was painful. The question is what we do next." She clinked her glass against his untouched wine. "Drink up, Admiral. Tomorrow we're launching the USS Pioneer for deep space exploration. There's a whole universe out there that's never heard of humans or the Dominion or any of this. A chance to start fresh." Daniel smiled despite himself. "You always did want to see what was beyond the horizon." "Somebody has to," she said with a grin. "And I figure after saving the galaxy, I've earned a little vacation." The peace ceremony officially concluded with the signing of the Galactic Compact, a new alliance that included humans, the Reformed Dominion, the Free Worlds Alliance, and a dozen other species who had chosen to join. It was not a perfect document. It could not undo the past or guarantee the future. But it was a beginning. Admiral Cole gave the final speech. He had practiced it 100 times, but in the end, he spoke from the heart. 3,000 years ago, our ancestors fled into the darkness. They ran from species who had decided that we were too dangerous to live. They hid in a nebula at the edge of the galaxy and waited for the universe to forget about them. He paused, looking out at the crowd of humans and aliens. But we did not spend those 3,000 years just surviving. We spent them learning, growing, preparing, not for revenge, but for this moment. The moment when we could return and prove that we deserved our place among the stars. He glanced at the children, still playing in the corner of the reception hall. "To many of you, we were myths. We were monsters from ancient stories, demons who haunted your ancestors' nightmares. And I understand why. We are dangerous. We are capable of terrible violence when we are threatened." His voice hardened slightly. "But we are also capable of mercy. We are capable of forgiveness. We are capable of building bridges instead of burning them. And that is the humanity I want to leave for those children. Not a legacy of war, but a legacy of hope." He raised his glass. "To the future, whatever it holds, we will face it together." The crowd echoed his toast, voices mixing in dozens of languages, all saying the same thing. To the future. 3 days later, Dr. Price published his comprehensive history of the First Exile War. The book became required reading in schools across the galaxy. For the first time, the truth was told, not human propaganda, not Dominion mythology, but the actual historical record of what had happened and why. One passage became particularly famous. It was the closing paragraph, the words that scholars would quote for centuries to come. They called us myths. They called us monsters. They called us gods. They feared us and hated us and tried to wipe us from existence. But through all of it, through 3,000 years of exile and a war that nearly destroyed us all, we survived. We endured. We forgave what could be forgiven and built something new from the ashes of the old. In the end, we were simply what we had always been, human, and that was enough. On a space station orbiting a distant star, a human child and a child sat by a window watching ships come and go. They had become friends over the past year, bonded by curiosity and the simple joy of play. Neither of them knew much about the history between their peoples. Neither of them cared. "Do you think we'll ever explore out there?" the child asked, pointing at the stars. The human child smiled. "Definitely. My mom says there's a whole universe waiting for us." Together. They sat in comfortable silence, two children who represented everything the galaxy could become. The myths were over. The truth had finally arrived. And for the first time in 3,000 years, the future looked bright.